Head to head. What's up? Today we have an interesting one. We are going to be discussing the best of the worst. And when we say the best of the worst, we're not really concluding the Washington Justice. We did a video on them already, and then when we were doing the draft, we didn't really want any of their players, so we just moved them to the side.
Yeah, listen, they're focusing on 2021, so that's fine. We'll leave them for 2021.
Like, they need to focus really hard. Make sure they do it right.
Yeah.
Today we're going to imagine there's an imaginary expansion team called the New Jersey Rabbits, and we're going to build them a team.
The New Jersey Rabbits.
We're going to build that team out of a few other teams. The Houston Outlaws, the Boston Uprising, the Toronto Defiant, and the Vancouver Titans. We have to take one player from each of those teams to attempt to build this super team for New Jersey.
Yep.
Where do you start?
My starting position with all of these situations where you must take a player from each team is to look at the worst team to start with and say, okay, who would be the best player to pick from there? So I'm looking at the Vancouver Titans because they're contenders players. They generally have, I would say it's fair to say, they generally have the least skill on the roster, but they do have a couple of standout players. So I think you could either pick Dalton here or KSA. I think that either of those would be pretty decent picks.
So I think looking at the rest of the rosters that we have to pick from, and your options at off tank are Meko, Nivix, Punk, or KSA. I probably go KSA.
Really? I think that I would go Meko. I would pick like Meko and Dalton, I think, would be...
Meko could have a resurgence on this roster, you think?
I think that Meko has been all right in the Houston Outlaws this year. The problem has been getting him on the same page as the rest of the team early on, and then making him work with the main tank, and Boomer and Hydration are just all over the place. So, I mean, poor Meko.
I was going to go with KSA because I really kind of wanted to give Logix a shout.
Oh, I see. Okay.
But you could take Dalton and go with Dante.
Well, let's
like a flexible
absolutely. Yeah. That's what I would end up doing. I mean, Dante, I think, is the best player on the Houston Outlaws. I think that he's a fantastic player.
He may be the best player out of all of the teams we listed.
Yeah, you know what? I think I might agree.
I don't even think that's really that big of a shocker.
I think that Kariv for the Toronto Defiant is another good shout, and so he would kind of be a lock into this conglomeration roster as well.
The New Jersey Rabbits.
The New Jersey Rabbits, yeah. But I think that Dante's very, very talented, and I think that he's, absolutely, like a superb player. I've just accidentally put a notepad in front of your face because that's what I was using to write that down.
Who do you get from Boston? Because you need one player. Do you have to take fusions?
Good question. I think that the Boston Uprising... I mean, are we saying a six-man roster here? Is that your personal rule?
Yeah, see, at that point, you kind of pigeonhole yourself into taking fusions or Halo.
Yeah, I think you have to go with fusions. Now, do I think that he's the best main tank out of these four teams?
He might be, actually. Houston, you have Hydration and Uma.
Yeah.
Toronto, you have Numlocked and Beast.
Yeah.
And then Shredlock for the Titans? Fusions might... I mean, you would have to say he's the best main tank out of those.
Yeah, I think there's going to be some Houston Outlaws fanboys that are talking about Muma, but that guy, I feel, really only excels at very specific styles of Overwatch, and he kind of... I don't think he has the all-round play necessary to like push him to the next level. Whereas Fusion has shown that he can be competent at a reasonably high level.
Like, potentially 3 of these players come from the Outlaws. Because you would think Meko, Dante, and then Jexe, right? Has to be your main. Jexe has to be your main support.
Yeah, I mean, maybe you could say Cruz instead, who's recently joined the Toronto Defiant. You could make an argument, I think, for Cruz over...
take the Toronto backline of, like, Kariv and Cruz, and then...
I would say, though, that Jexe has... I would say that Jexe has performed better so far this season. Cruz, we haven't seen too much of recently. Or rather that he joined so recently that we haven't seen too much of him. Well, and when he was playing for Paris, he ended up getting benched for FD God. So I don't know. I think that Jexe would be the would be the more like evidence-based pick.
And then, okay, so let's say that's the team. Let's say the team is Fusions, Meko, Dalton, Dante, Kariv, and Jexe. How many games does this team have on the win column right now? Well, and let's use the Houston Outlaws 14 games as the bar.
Well, let's first try and figure out if it's actually better than the other teams, right? Like by trying to create an excellent or like the best possible roster, but we've given ourselves the limitations of it needing to have one player from each roster. So it doesn't necessarily have to be better. It might be worse. Like when I compare this team to the Houston Outlaws, their current roster, I feel like
Do you think it's better?
I think it's... Yeah, I do think that's better. The thing that concerns me when you only have 6 players on a roster is its flexibility. And I'm looking at Dante and Dalton, and I'm just running through my head of like what they would play. But I think they're both really flexible, actually.
Yeah.
Dante is like hyper flexible. He plays Tracer incredibly well. He has picked up like projectile heroes in the past, like the Genji and the Pharah. He plays the Sombra. Yeah, if you wanted to play some more like pure raw hit scan, Dalton would play that. Yeah, Dante's been very good on the Echo. Very good on the Echo. So, yeah, I think that this team actually does have a lot of flexibility.
Like the Outlaws sit at 5-9 right now. Like this team out of 14 games, like are they 3 wins better than what the current Outlaws are? Like an 8-win team right now?
I don't really know, because their advantage over the Outlaws is, in my opinion, they have a more stable all-round main tank in the form of Fusions, but I don't think that pushes them much higher up, because the problem with putting Fusions in over Muma in this hypothetical world is that Muma can win you games when it's like a Winston dive meta. You know, like when Houston were winning those games at the beginning of the season with the Doomfist Sombra kind of comps? That played really well into Blase. You don't really have that Doomfist specialist on the team right now. I don't even know whether Dalton or Dante play Doomfist. I mean, I'm sure they've picked it up in ranked, but I don't remember them ever playing it in a match. So you've kind of taken the strengths away from the Houston Outlaws, and you've made the team better all round. I do think that they're better all round.
Yeah,
they've got Kariv over Repel, and they've got Fusions at the main tank position, who's going to be a more solid main tank to put alongside Meko. Well, but I think that maybe you miss out on some of the wins that you previously would have got.
In a let's say like a 28 game season, what do you think this team's record is? Do they go 500? Are they above 500?
I don't think so. I think that this team probably sits
close, probably.
Yeah, probably sits somewhere around a 500. When I look at them, they strike me a little bit like a Toronto Defiant kind of team, where they've got some good players, but do I really think that they're going to be able to put it together? I don't know, because the Toronto Defiant themselves have got decent pieces. They don't really have any large holes outside of their main tank position, but they haven't really been able to come up with the goods.
Does the roster change at all if we remove the restrictions of you have to pick one player from each team, and does it get better?
I think it would get better, actually, if you just remove the restriction of only 6 players. If you could make this a proper Overwatch League roster where you would pick up multiple players.
Let's say you added like agilities to the bench.
Yeah, I would probably add Blase to the bench. I don't know. Is that weird? Oh, yeah, Surefour is actually sick. Yeah, Surefour is probably the best.
I mean, Logix as well.
Yeah. The Toronto Defiant have Surefour and Logic. The Toronto Defiant are such a weird team because they should be decent.
And agilities, they should be decent. And they have Kariv and Karuz.
Yeah, I actually think the Numlocked is going to do a lot for the Toronto Defiant. I don't know whether you've seen the interviews, Matt, of the Toronto Defiant kind of GM and staff positions, but they've been talking recently about how some of the players on that roster are very heavily invested in success and they only want success, and some of the other people just can't bring it. Like, they just can't bring that level of focus and attention. And so I think Numlocked being... So if I'm to read between the lines here, I'm not saying that I know this for a fact, but just based on what they're saying, it seems like them bringing in a main tank, they're trying to pick up somebody that has the drive and desire to be the best, which Numlocked absolutely does.
I feel like... Yeah, but like, what? I mean, I guess that's good. That kind of sucks.
Yeah, I think, though, that the Toronto Defiant will value that because Numlocked is someone that's hyper passionate about winning and is very vocal and will have the same level of desire to accomplish things with the Toronto Defiant that like
If you're-
Showfall will have, for example, and Cruz.
If you're not attempting to win, what is the goal?
Well, I think some people don't. They just can't focus that much in a regular season. They can't bring the same amount of attention and focus and drive to every single game. It requires quite a. You have to have an incredible work ethic, I think, to be a pro player. That like, you know, the difference between like a Kobe kind of figure, right? Like Kobe was just 110% in every single game, no matter what. Didn't have time for other teammates that didn't want to bring it. You can still make it to the top, and you can still say that you want to win. But there's a difference between someone who says they want to win and someone that puts absolutely everything into winning.
I guess kind of thinking back to how I was, like, I just couldn't understand not like if you can't put everything you have into winning, like, just don't play.
Yeah.
Just go do something else.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, especially like if those people are on your team, like that's a frustrating thing to deal with. So
yeah,
maybe we see Numlock make a difference.
Because that's about a mentality difference. It's not about a skill difference. And if the Toronto Defiant staff is to be believed that is the biggest problem with the team, then I could see Numlock making a pretty decent difference for the Toronto Defiant and turning them into a team that's like that's actually capable of the middling performance that we thought they were, rather than being a bottom team. You know?
Yeah. I don't know if he's gonna make like that big of a difference though. They sit at 4-8.
Yeah.
Right now. So I mean, they're not that far out of it, Toronto, right? I mean,
yeah, they could reasonably make a bit of a push to go back up the table. When I look at these bottom teams, what strikes me is that you really have your pick of the litter in terms of DPS.
They're good.
You can go for Shawfall, Logix. You can add Jerry in there. You can pick up Dante and maybe even Blase if you want a specialist. You can go for a bunch of different people.
Is looking at these teams and making this team more of an indication of how much tanks make or break a roster?
I think that's what it comes down to. Yeah, absolutely. You look at the teams at the bottom of the league this year and you say that, okay, some of them actually have really good support players as well. Myunbong on the Boston Uprising, absolutely a decent support player. Kariv, we've seen a lot of success from him before in the past. And it's not like their other supports are letting them down either. I mean, Halo's not that great, but Cruz is perfectly decent, and Jex is perfectly decent, and Repel's perfectly decent. I think a lot of the problems of these teams come down to, especially their main tanks, but their tank lines in general. And I think that the Boston Uprising upgrading to Punk has changed some of the team dynamic and shown that, like, once you have a functional tank line, they actually were able to beat the Gladiators and take Paris to 5 maps. So, really focusing on getting the best tank line possible is the key to winning with this conglomerate roster that we're trying to form.
Because there are enough DPS players. I think it's proven that there are enough DPS players to make, and I think that, look, good DPS players plus really good tanks makes those good DPS players look great, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I feel like there's enough good DPS players to go around in this crew. Even I feel like the supports aren't that bad. It's like you look at the tanks, and I think that's where some of these teams have fallen apart. I think even with adding Numlock to Toronto kind of proves that.
Yeah.
Where they feel like that tank's a tough position.
Yeah, absolutely. Right, so I think though that Fusions and Meko is probably the best tank line that you could create out of these. I mean, you could make arguments for maybe
KSA like, Fusions.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say you could make an argument for Fusions and Punk just because you know that it works, but works to some small degree. But I don't think there's an argument for getting rid of Meko at the off tank personally. Like, even for KSA, who looks like he has a lot of promise and potential, he's still a rookie talent that we haven't really seen perform at like a decent level ever.
We've seen 2 games from Punk too, right?
Yeah, that's true.
So it'd be kind of hard to. I mean, I don't think Meko's been incredible this season, but I think just looking at what he's done in the past, and then also looking at how poor they've been in terms of main tank Houston, you have to give him some benefit of the doubt there.
Yeah.
That it's not really all on him.
Yeah.
This is interesting. It's now brought into light how bad some of the main tank positions are on some of these teams.
But I don't think that's because I don't necessarily think that's because these teams were bad at roster building in the offseason.
No.
I just think that there aren't that many great main tanks to go around. It's one of the most competitive roles in the whole of the league. But I don't mean that in the sense that it's hard to get a spot in the league. I mean that the difference between the top level and the bottom level is so enormous.
It's why a team like the Gladiators trades a player like Decay to get OG, because they feel that having that type of main tank is that, like, that rock is that big of a difference maker as compared to having somebody in the damage dealing role that can put up numbers.
And you also look at the other team that we ignored for this project, the Washington Justice, and they also are having problems at their tank positions as well. You look at Roar and you look at
I never would have thought that Roar coming over from the Gladiators would have looked exactly the same.
and Janus previously before that as well. I think the counter argument to this is Bren's point that he likes to bring up, where he says that if a team is just sucking, it's the tank that looks the worst. But I think that there is some truth to that, but I also think that there's just such a prevalent pattern among the lower teams of their tanks being the position that even just on paper you would be questioning.
Well, yes, because there's times where we've seen teams that have struggled, but you know that the main tank is not the issue. Like, even when the Outlaws were struggling last year, nobody was like, oh, Muma's the problem, right? Muma was still playing well. Like, we still thought Muma was one of the better players on the team.
I was saying Muma's the problem. But you're right. Other people weren't saying that Muma's the problem.
Other people weren't saying Muma's the problem. You know, maybe you just knew. Maybe you were just trying to put out hot takes because you were on the desk just trying to stir up some kind of shit.
Possible.
But I believed that, like, there wasn't that big. Well, hold on. Let me look through some of the bottom teams from last year and actually see.
They're very similar. I mean, we had the Florida Mayhem as well, but they were changing their roster around.
They were changing their roster around.
I mean, they started. I can't even remember who was starting for them at the beginning of the year, but they ended up playing a lot of Fate and a little bit of Karayan. But I think that's the kind of team where the team itself was just a disaster.
Yeah,
not the main tank position, but I mean, like Janus for the Washington Justice, I think that was a mixture of both. Like, the team was absolutely out of their depth, but also the Justice themselves didn't have the greatest main tank.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think the bottom four had really poor main tanks last year with Toronto, Washington, Boston, where Fusions, I think I was actually good for most of the year, but their team was just kind of, I mean, that's where you can tell, right? So look at Boston last year, and like, they didn't even have, after they got rid of Note, they didn't even really have an off tank. They were playing like RCK, Sombra shit, and what, they had Blase playing Diva for most of the season. Like,
it was
like, that's one where, like, you knew that Fusions was better than what he was working with last year. The Justice Janus, I mean, we had already seen Janus in New York. We didn't have to see him again with Washington. Toronto, what? I mean, they had they had
all sorts of different players.
They had Sharik for half of the year.
Yeah, didn't they start with like No Smite and then they went over to Sharik?
No, that was they started with somebody who was like he fed like a monster, dude, and we used to laugh about it. What was his name?
I can't
Johnny
remember.
Used to just maul.
Oh, Yak Pung. That's who it was. It was Yak Pung. Yeah.
Yak Pung.
Yeah.
Yep. The guy who had charge bound to every key.
Yes.
And then the Outlaws with Muma.
Yeah.
But I don't think Muma was that poor personally last year.
Yeah.
You're like,
yeah. I mean, also the Houston Outlaws have got hydration at the moment, right? Which they've said is because Muma's got some wrist issues, but hydration's already started playing a bit more main tank for this roster. So even if Muma was at peak form, I think hydration would be taking over some of the time.
That was the rumors, like, in the off season, is that teams wanted hydration not as a damage dealer but as a tank.
Yeah, it's weird to watch him play though, because you can tell that he's really good for a DPS player, but compared to the other main tanks in the league, he still looks a bit desperate when he plays. Like, when he's playing the Reinhardt, he's just like desperately trying to make a play happen rather than being comfortable just holding his position. And then I think his Orisa and his Ballers better heroes, but they're still not like.
Yeah, he's kind of learning on the fly. But I believe, though, like, Hydration's a player that has enough potential where if they give him time and let him kind of get used to it, I think he can get there in terms of being a main tank.
He's a good player, and I think it's I think it's a necessary experiment for the Houston Outlaws because their tank line, I think, is the focal point of Houston, and it needs to improve because you need to get the most potential out of Meko, and you need to be able to push forward and support Dante.
Well, look, I mean, if it doesn't work out, they can just have Meko call up Giannis, and they can just run it back.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, the Giannis and Meko duo. They've got established synergy.
This is a fun conversation talking about some of the teams where we weren't sure what we were going to talk about.
Yeah.
We were like, how do we talk about some of these teams? Because I know there's fans of these teams, but they're even like, hey, I'm a Boston fan, and I know we're not making it. Unless they let everybody in, we ain't gonna be there. But maybe you will though. Maybe Boston. Which of these teams do you like the best in the second half of the year?
Well, Boston have already started to bounce back a little bit, right? In the main melee, they looked okay.
I've almost convinced myself internally on Toronto.
I think that Numlocked has the potential to make a big difference to Toronto. And I don't mean that because he's a big individual mechanical upgrade to Beast, but maybe I'm naive, but I believe the Toronto Defiance analysis of the situation where they're saying that they just need a different kind of figure for the team. Like it's an internal issue, and I don't mean that people are at each other's necks, but it's just like a mentality they all need to be on the same page, and I think that Numlock can do a lot for them in that regard. Add a little bit of initiative for them.
They've had a bunch of close games to Toronto, and like one of those close games goes the other way, and if they're a team that's like 5-7 with a better record than the Outlaws, like right on the cusp of like an Atlanta reign, like, and granted Atlanta's played 2 less games, but the Toronto Defiant have won more maps, right? And they have 22 map wins, 28 map losses. Like they've just played a ton of maps. Like you can tell, like the series go like 4 or 5 games pretty consistently with Toronto.
Yeah.
What does their schedule look like?
I do not believe in the Houston Outlaws. I'll just put that straight out there. And the Vancouver Titans, I think, have way too many issues, like they're playing on high ping and stuff like that, for them to get good by the end of the season. I just don't think that that's realistic, even though I don't think that's the players' fault.
Look out for Toronto these next few weeks, because they get the Titans, the Rain, and the Fuel. And these are all teams, like we talk about the Rain and the Fuel, like they're much better than Toronto, but they're in the kind of same wheelhouse in terms of record.
Yeah, I think the Fuel are trending upwards where the Atlanta Rain are trending downwards. So if the Toronto can catch a win off either of them, it would be huge for Toronto.
Like if they could have a 2-1 3-game run, get one win against either Dallas or Atlanta. I think Atlanta is probably more winnable than Dallas, but
on the other hand, you've got the Boston Uprising, and I think that you have to start paying attention to this team a little bit because they beat the Gladiators and they went to 5 maps against the Paris Eternal. They play against the Paris Eternal again in a regular season match on June 13th. That's our opening game for the June tournament. So this is going to give us an idea of where the Boston Uprising are at. Like, was it a big fluke? Can this DPS line still perform when Echo is out? I think that's a huge question mark because Punk's looked good on the D.Va, but the Sigma is also perfectly fine for him. So D.Va being banned does not affect him, I think.
This one's almost a must-win, too, because they also have Philly and...
they have Titans.
They have the Titans, yeah. So they need to get at least one win, though.
I think that this is a huge opportunity for Boston to go 2-1 in the June tournament if they can beat Paris. Do I think they're going to? No, because Echo is banned. I think that Color Hex really needs that Echo for Boston to be at a top level. Because if you just have to stick him on the May or some kind of hit scan, I don't think that he's as good as the other teams in the league, the other players in the league. But as soon as you put him on the Echo, he actually looks like he can make a big difference.
Yeah, and then the Titans have a reasonably difficult split. They have Toronto to kick things off. Then they play, I believe, 2 games the last week. One of them won't count towards the June tournament. They play Dallas in the second game. And then their last week, they end up playing, I believe it is Boston. And then they also play Atlanta.
Yeah, those are
tough.
Yeah, it's just tough all around for them because they haven't been a team for very long and their players don't have the experience and they're playing on like upwards of 100 ping. So yeah, it's a GG for the Titans. Honestly, if you're a Titans fan, I think you go next.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to look through who does Washington play. Washington plays the Gladiators, the Shock, and the Valiant.
Yeah, they're done. They're done.
Are we just writing it down 0-3?
Yep, write it down. Get it in the books. They
Yeah,
we already did it.
Vancouver has a better chance of winning a game than
Washington. Yeah, I actually agree with
Washington.
you. Even though their team is arguably better with Jano and Stitch, I think I agree. Yeah.
I think this split's going to be very difficult for the Justice. Well, let us know what you guys thought of our New Jersey team. How do you think
New
they
Jersey
would do?
Rabbits.
Do you think we missed anybody who should be playing for the Rabbits in our 6-man roster that we could potentially grow, depending on if we have the budget to or not? All depends.
Yeah. We don't have a very big budget at the moment, Matt.
Yeah,
Plat
us
chat
know
budget
also,
very small.
Very, very small right now. Let us know as well which teams out of those four, the Washington Justice, the Vancouver Titans, the Houston Outlaws, and the Boston Uprising, you like the best in the second half of the season. More head-to-heads coming soon. Bye.
Bye.